Welcome to another lecture in the series here in Basic Geriatrics and Gerontology. My name is Tony Danuzzo, and I'm the Program Director for the East Texas Geriatric Education Center. Again, I'd like to welcome you today, and I'm really excited about this program that we have today. We're shifting now to a major part of the ETGC initiative, which is to explore what I'm calling special populations. All populations are special, but we have certain groups that we're going to be talking about that maybe we don't hear that much about from different cultures, different locations, different types of communities. And in addition, we have a special guest speaker who will be basically continuing what was done last month when Dr. Vic Serapina talked about healthy aging, and now we're going to be looking healthy aging in terms of this type of integrative medicine towards Alzheimer's disease, and we're going to talk about that a little later. So we have an agenda. Everybody have handouts, okay? Everybody has a handout. Everything should be more or less in there that you can follow along. We're going to try to keep on schedule even though we're running late, so I'm not going to try to talk for too long about this, but please feel free to ask questions as we go along. This is being videotaped, so we have a lot that we're going to be able to do. We're videotaping this, and it will be available on DVDs for others that maybe haven't been able to see the whole session that will be going on today. As I said, this is a series of lectures that's part of the Scholar of Aging program. It's a large 160-hour program that we're providing to all health professionals throughout East Texas. We have some regulars now that we're seeing on a regular basis, and it's really good to see them come back each month. Our program more or less has combinations of topics that are in, let me just move this over here so the other sites can see what I'm doing. There we go. Topics in clinical geriatrics as well as in gerontology and, as it said, special populations. For example, next month we're going to be looking at rural elderly in rural communities and older prisoners. Okay? This month we're looking at the health of older minorities. The information, if you'd like more about our program, is located on our website. It's located in your handout. And we have a lot of technology that we're dealing with, many different sites that we're telecasting and broadcasting to, and we have access to a BlackBerry for them to be able to contact me by email if there are any questions for speakers as well as any problems with the broadcast in video or audio. We have each month we're providing a number of activities. For January we're concentrating on Hispanic elders and culture and how it works within communities, and we have these will be online very shortly for our participants in the Scholar of Aging program. We are broadcasting to 5 sites today: Lamar University in Beaumont, Stephen F. Austin in Nacogdoches, Sam Houston State in Huntsville, University of Texas Health Center at Tyler, and McLennan Community College in Waco. And we also have others sometimes that come on board, but these are the ones that we'll have today. We offer another feature, numerous types of CE credits. We have CME. We have evaluation forms for them outside on the tables. Please fill them out, and you can get them to me when you complete one of the sessions or all the sessions. You can get partial credit if you like. We have a total of 2.75 hours that we're providing. And please make sure that you sign in if you want to obtain the CE credits. This is a number that you can contact for other information on CME. CME we're doing a little differently than we had in the past. Previously we had to be here the whole session to get any credit to CME. Well, we finally worked it out, and now we're going to be able to give partial credit if you stay for a certain number of hours. If you stay on the first and second session or the second and third session, you'll be able to obtain certain CME credit hours, or a total of 3.2 hours if you stay the full 3 hours. And this information is in your handout. We also have CEUs for social work, 0.3 hours. That you have to sign in on a special sign-in sheet on the table located outside, as well as fill out the evaluation form specifically for social workers. And then CEs for physical therapists and occupational therapists. Okay? So, are there any questions on the CE? portion of our presentation today. I love it when I get that over with, because it's just, now we get to the good stuff. Okay, I also need to say that for the CE, none of our speakers today have any commercial affiliations. That includes Dr. Chalsa and myself and Dr. Markides. I want to introduce Dr. Vic Serapini again, who will be introducing our speaker for today.
Thanks, Tony. It's a pleasure to meet with you. It's a pleasure to bring Dr. Chalsa. He came in from Tucson for this presentation and partially supported by our alternative medicine education and mind-body research grants, as well as geriatrics. I've known Dharma almost 20 years. We met back in the 80s. We were studying acupuncture together. He was working as an anesthesiologist at that time. He trained at UCSF, did mainline anesthesiology for many years, has been in the pain management side of it. And then back about 10 or 12 years ago, he got very interested in the problems of cognitive dysfunction. His practice has been in the Southwest, Albuquerque, Phoenix. He's now in Tucson. So he founded and is medical director, co-founded with his wife Kirti, the Alzheimer's Prevention Foundation. He's the medical director of that. He has testified before Congress and the Surgeon General, and they receive federal support for research and health education in this area of Alzheimer's. Dr. Loera, myself, Michelle, and Dr. Grumbles co-authored an article on integrative approaches to the treatment and prevention of Alzheimer's, and in that we featured Dr. Chalsa's work. So it's a very special approach that he takes. It's very holistic, and it's becoming increasingly popular as this condition of dementia increases in our society. So I welcome Dr. Dharma Singh Khalsa.
Thank you. Morning, everybody, or afternoon now. I'm very happy to be here in Galveston. It's very relaxing here. I don't know if you know that, living here. It's very nice here. We enjoyed it very much and appreciate greatly Dr. Serapini and his lovely wife, Michelle. Serapina's support and friendship and having us come down here, and very, very happy to come down here. The interesting thing that Vic said that I listened to right away was about as the problem of Alzheimer's continues, the treatment modalities are changing, I think, to paraphrase what he said. And I guess my take-home message for you all today would be that the era of one drug magic bullet therapy for treatment of Alzheimer's disease is coming to an end. And what we see now is a change in the paradigm, both in the thrust towards the idea of prevention as opposed to treatment, and in treatment itself, where the paradigm is changing from one of, as I said, a magic bullet drug approach to what we call an integrative approach. So that would be the take-home message, and that's really the most important thing that I want to tell you. The idea is to look towards prevention. And this is not a new concept. In fact, it goes back probably 5,000 years or more when the Chinese, paid the doctor for keeping the patients well. If the patient wasn't well and got sick, came to the doctor didn't get paid. It was for prevention. Also, Hippocrates talked about food as medicine and prevention. But the modern era of prevention really goes to the great Dr. Charlie Mayo, who was one of the founders of the Mayo Clinic, who said, that which can be foreseen can be prevented. And today we know that with the aging of the population, with the baby boomers coming of age, and I'm the first wave of that, born in 1946, we see that this problem of chronic disease, with especially Alzheimer's disease, will be increasing. And I think it was best put by that wonderful comedian Red Skelton, who said, there are three signs of old age. Loss of memory is the first one, and I forget the other two. So again, if we know that something's coming, especially with aging, we know that, as we'll see in a moment, that the greatest risk factor in development of Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline and memory loss is aging. So if we know it's coming, just like with heart disease, we know so much more than we used to about the prevention of heart disease and, frankly, cancer as well. Alzheimer's disease is now being looked at least in some more enlightened circles, shall I say, as a disease in large measure, not totally, of course, but in large measure as a disease of lifestyle. And the most recent study on that came out just in the last week about brain scans showing a strong link between dementia and obesity. Someone who's heavy for most of their life because they get hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, and elevated cortisol, which we're going to talk about in great detail at about 30 minutes from now, does have a high risk of developing dementia. And they looked at brain scans, and you can see Alzheimer's disease, like every chronic illness, is not something that you wake up with one day. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes years and years and years to develop an illness like that. Some of the studies by Snowden and others show that it could take as long as 30 or 40 years. You have pictures in your brain on brain scans that show the changes in the brain long before a person develops the symptoms. So this is not an overnight disease. Just to point out, I always thought it was 60. Seems like the numbers are going up. 66% of Americans are obese. So imagine if 66% of adults are obese and dementia and long-term obesity is a risk factor, you could have 100 million people who are at the risk for dementia here in the next generation. We always say that the numbers are going to double at least in our generation by 2020, and by 2050 they're thought to quadruple to go from the current 4 million to 20 million people. But imagine if this is true, then you're going to have 100 million people with dementia, and what are we going to do with all these people, especially if we don't undertake a prevention program? And it was Zayvon Khachaturian, who's the president of the Nancy and Ronald Reagan Alzheimer's Foundation, who said that if we can slow the development of this disease by 5 years, we can cut the incidence in half. And if we can slow it by 10 years, which I think is possible, and which is what I'm going to share with you today, then we can virtually eliminate Alzheimer's, because people will essentially, they'll get something else, and they'll, this thing is making noise, is that okay? They'll die of something else if we can slow the disease by 10 years. When I first started this work 12 years ago, I have to say that it was not well accepted in conventional medicine by medical doctors, and certainly not by the Alzheimer's Association, who did not feel that this work should be talked about, that there was any possibility of preventing Alzheimer's disease or of doing anything holistic to treat it. But now I'm happy to say that they've adopted many of our ideas, and now they have something on their website called the Maintain Your Brain program, and they talk about managing your numbers, which is what we talked about: diabetes, cholesterol, high blood pressure, and exercising your body and brain, which we'll talk about in detail here, and feeding your brain well. So I'm very thrilled. Really, I can't tell you how happy I am that the Alzheimer's Association is adopting and adapting to some of these changes. It's wonderful to see that. I'm very happy. Now, I come at this, as Vic said, from an anesthesiologist background. I did my residency in anesthesia at UC San Francisco. And I was chief resident there and did some research. When you're chief resident at UC, you do research, and I did 2 studies, main studies. One was anesthetic management of a certain open heart surgery procedure, and we found, believe it or not, that if you can reduce the stress during the operation, you get the best result. Now you're going to say, well, that's a no-brainer, but back then it was really, in the mid-70s, it was something. And I was also involved in research, as I was discussing last night with Vic and Moishi, on epidural anesthesia. I was part of the team that discovered that epidurals were the safest and most effective form of anesthetic for mothers and newborn during cesarean section. So that was my background that I had, and we also measured endorphins, and of course we found the anesthetic that lowered stress the most was the most efficient. That's what happened. And I'm giving you that as a background, so it provides a foundation for what I'm going to talk about. Now, again, besides having the Western background, what happened was I moved to New Mexico in 1978 and started studying yoga with a yoga master. This is my teacher, Yogi Bhajan, and from him I learned a lot about the foundations of what you now call integrative medicine or alternative medicine. I mean, he was from India, a true yoga master. So from him I learned a lot about meditation and yoga and natural living and nutrition and things like that. And I didn't just stop there. I also went to Harvard and studied mind-body medicine with Herb Benson, and as Vic said, took acupuncture training at UCLA. So I come at this from a very broad background and had a progression. It didn't happen overnight. As he said, I went from anesthesia to pain management, and then I got very interested in integrative medicine and made a discovery. And when I was at the University of Arizona, I was recruited there to start the acupuncture stress medicine and chronic pain program in 1990. And did some reading in the literature on stress and found that there was a conversation going on about stress, chronic stress and memory loss. And from that was the impetus to create the Alzheimer's Prevention Foundation. Now, when I testified before Congress, I explained my viewpoint on integrative medicine. And I must say, this got their attention. I don't think it's that, is it? Anyway, so what I told them was about integrative medicine. I said to really, and this is good, to understand integrative medicine, what you have to do is imagine two rivers. And the river on the right is what we call conventional medicine, which is essentially drugs and surgery, more or less. Okay, that's on the right. And the river on the left is what they call alternative or complementary medicine. And in that river, you have nutrition, supplements, acupuncture, massage, yoga, meditation, all those things, exercise, things like that, that aren't drugs and surgery. And where these two rivers come together in a powerful confluence, not unlike Niagara Falls, you know, where it comes together and you get that tremendous energy, this is where the power, the healing power of integrative medicine is found. So it's where everything comes together. We use everything that's available, the best of everything, the best of the East and the best of the West, and we use it together. That's why we call it integrative medicine. It is a medical program, but it is integrated. So that is the tremendous power of integrative medicine. It's synergistic. 1 and 1 in this case is not 2. 1 and 1 is 3 or 9 or 11. That is the tremendous power of integrative medicine. And if any one of you has worked in it or will work in it, you'll see what I'm talking about. So the major risk factors for cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease, mild cognitive impairment, etc., as in the general population is, as I mentioned, first of all, age. Age 65, there's a 10% incidence. Age 85, there's a 50% incidence. And the population, the baby boomers, now are coming into full force, and so there's a big swell in people that age. So you see that there is going to be an epidemic or a marked increase in the number of people who are going to be complaining that their brain isn't working as well as they want it to. Then, of course, genetics, like any illness, and the ApoE4 gene is related to the development of Alzheimer's as well as high cholesterol. But, you know, this thing about genes, and not everybody with the gene gets Alzheimer's. And if you want to look at this concept of genetics more closely, you should go on and Google or go up and study the twin studies from Scandinavia and elsewhere, where two people who are the twins, you know, they separated at birth, one goes to New York, one goes to Texas or something, they don't get the same illnesses even though they have DNA. It's what I call the signals that you send to your body. How you live your life sends a certain signal to your gene, and that can create the illness. So it's not just about your genes, it's what you do to your genes. For example, as you know, if you had two people who had the same genes, one smoked 5 packs of cigarettes a day, one didn't smoke, the one who smoked would probably be less healthy than the one who didn't smoke. I mean, it just stands to reason. And now this fantastic enlightened medical journal, Newsweek, has come up with something called Diet and Genes. And last week, then Time had Mind Body this week, so it's really coming into the mainstream. And they talk a lot about two things, diet and how it affects your genes, especially producing inflammation, which is a hallmark of just about every illness. And they talk a lot about stress, which we're going to talk about here today. It's nothing new. It just seems to be recycling as more and more studies are done. Family history, like genes, has an increased risk. It gives a person a 3 to 7 times increased risk of developing memory loss. And finally, the whole thrust of the talk and the idea is behind lifestyle. How you live your life, like any illness, can determine what illness you're going to develop. So based on that, we've come up with what I call the 4 pillars. And these are basically nutrition and supplementation, stress management, exercise, and drugs. As I said, it is a medical program. We're not against drugs. I do consultations, and when people come to me on medication, I very rarely, if ever, take them off of medication. So, you know, I just want you to understand that it is a total medical program. We do use medicine and hormones or other medications that are indicated. You know, if it's indicated, we use it. And I'm going to be talking about each one of these in detail now. Dr. Bill Grant, who is a NASA scientist, he's not a medical person, did a very interesting review of the World Health Organization literature. He did this because his mother developed Alzheimer's disease. And this is back in 1997, and here's what he found, here's what he saw. Countries, he studied Alzheimer's disease versus fat, as well as calories, by the way. And this Newsweek article reviews very well all the recent literature on caloric restriction, low-calorie diets, and aging. But he found that the countries in the world, primarily, well, just about all, your Western countries, that have a high intake of fat and calories have the highest incidence of Alzheimer's disease. And of course, the United States is number, USA is number. We always want to be number one in everything we do. And here we are, again, we're number one. Number one in the intake of fat, calories, and chronic disease. All your chronic diseases, we just about have one on that. Heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, arthritis, we're up there number one. A lot of it must be related to the diet. Because you see down here, your Oriental countries, except for Nigeria, which is high in grains and low in fat, the Oriental countries, you could put India in here as well, with a high intake of special foods. What do you think a couple of those protective foods are, anybody? Any ideas what the protective foods are of these countries down here? Huh? Rice? Not exactly. But that rice does protect because grains protect in Nigeria. It wasn't rice. Somebody said something? Fish, I heard? Fish is one. What do you think the other might be? Vegetables, of course, you're going to see that. That's not what came out in this study or in the current research or the literature, but soy is the other one, as we'll see. But Pardon? Tea, yeah, green tea is now getting a lot of also research. But the interesting thing was with Nigeria and Japan, when people from Japan moved to the United States, they developed the same incidence of Alzheimer's disease. And when they moved from Nigeria to Indianapolis, Indiana, that's where they happened to move them, they also developed the American incidence of Alzheimer's disease. Could be the lifestyle in addition to diet, of course, probably much more stressful here than elsewhere. But this is important. So it's not about the carbs, as you see. I'm not saying carbs aren't important, but it's not about the carbs and this craze of low-carb diets. What you see, it's the fat in the diet, the calories, and the portion size. I think if someone eats a balanced diet and has a little bit of meat, it's probably okay. But you have to watch out for those trans fats and those processed foods, because that's where you really get this high concentration of bad fat, not good fat. Because good fats found in soy and in fish oil, especially the omega-3 fats are found in fish oil. And Dr. Cole from UCLA, writing in Neuron, in the journal Neuron, published a study in September 2004 showing that soy and fish oil may actually prevent Alzheimer's disease. He did the original studies in mice and rats, but he wrote about it for humans as well. And here's a study from Case Western Reserve University that showed that the adult lifetime dietary consumption, basically, of carrots and carotene and vitamin A and vitamin E and vitamin C and all those really good antioxidants in your diet decrease your risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. So it is important what you eat can determine, and I know this is, for many people, this is new information. It's hard to maybe digest this, shall we say, all at once, but it is true that how you eat can determine whether a person develops Alzheimer's.
I'd like to emphasize that study was about antioxidants in food as opposed
Exactly.
to supplements.
Right. So it's important that we're talking about diet now. We are going to talk about supplements, but this is antioxidant consumption in your food, which is why the National Institutes on Aging and NIH has said, of course, your 5 servings of fresh fruits and vegetables has gone to 7, and now the American Institute of Cancer Research has gone up to 9, saying that we have to have 9. It's not that hard to get a serving. It's just like your palm of your hand. If you have a salad, you probably have 3 or 4. We had a great smoothie this morning. Probably had 2 or 3 in there. Blueberries. Was there another fruit in there? Some orange juice. There you go. So, it's not that hard to get 7 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables. Just have to try to do it. But that has the antioxidants in that. But we will talk about supplements because they're important as well. Now I'm going to talk about, as I said, supplements, and these are memory-specific nutrients that are supported by research, by good academic research. First of all, vitamin E came into a little trouble lately, but a lot of people think that was a flawed study, that vitamin E is in fact safe and beneficial. And the research that most people point to is a study by Sano that showed that in patients with mid-stage Alzheimer's disease, if you give them 2,000 international units of vitamin E a day, you actually slow the progression of Alzheimer's. And it was a study that looked at a drug called selegiline or Depronil plus or either with or without vitamin E. So vitamin E is an important antioxidant. And I think it should be supplemented in diet because most people don't get enough vitamin E. You don't have to take 2,000. That's treatment. And as we'll see, a lot of you can actually augment your treatment of Alzheimer's, for example, with Aricept by combining it with vitamin E and other things. Dr. Serapina.
Do you think that the use of the natural vitamin E, the tocotrienols and other tocopherols besides alpha, has a potential additive benefit?
Definitely, yeah, and I think that the other thing about that study was it didn't differentiate between synthetic vitamin E and natural vitamin E. And Vic's talking about taking the whole conglomerate of vitamin E rather than, for example, alpha tocopherol. It's very important. You know, I don't think we're going to have time in an hour to go into the finer points and the details of this. I'd be happy to come back and do that at some other time. But what he's saying is true. I mean, even within each one of these topics, each one of these supplements are fine points, and research has been done to support this. So vitamin E, I think, is important. And I think the next one is, oh, I'm sorry. I want to go back to that. Coenzyme Q10, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Ginkgo has been studied, probably about 400 studies outside of the United States, 2 or 3 or 4 in the United States. All the studies have been positive. There was even a head-to-head study between Ginkgo and Aricept that showed that Ginkgo was actually more beneficial than Aricept. And this was essentially kind of kept under the rug by the drug company, but Ginkgo is very good at improving blood flow, of course, to the brain. And it's also a modest free radical scavenger. If you ever go to Tokyo, you see Ginkgo trees grow right down the busiest street in Tokyo, and that's a very polluted area, and the trees flourish. Same thing in Rome. Ginkgo trees grow, and so they're very powerful at scavenging free radicals. Phosphatidyl serine is a very interesting nutrient that essentially rebuilds the brain cell membrane. So it allows transfer of nutrients and other important interactions to take place. The brain cell membrane is not unlike the bottom of your sneaker or your tire. It wears out with time. So phosphatidyl serine, which has been studied very well at Stanford, Vanderbilt, and European medical centers, has been shown to rebuild the brain cell membrane and improve memory, as we'll see. Just a caveat, the original studies were done with cows' brain. Phosphatidyl serine derived from cow's brain, so you obviously can understand that fell into disrepute for a while, and phosphatidyl serine wasn't available, but now it's been learned, the couple companies have figured out how to synthesize phosphatidyl serine from soybeans and repeated the studies. So phosphatidyl serine, again, it's not used by conventional neurologists, but I think it should be because it's very effective, and I found it to be very useful. Then the last thing is DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. It's an omega-3 acid, not from fish, it's from the algae or from the grasses in the ocean that the fish eat. So when you eat a fish and you get the omega-3s, you're getting it secondhand, and this is what the fish eat. And so this is one of the omega-3 oils that's very useful along with the others. So these are the main supplements. I don't think there's anything like far out here or anything like that. These are what I found to be useful and backed by scientific data. Let me just show you a couple of things about CoQ10, simply that as we age, like everything else, hormones and other things, it decreases in our brain. And if you've forgotten where coenzyme Q10 acts, why it's so important, it's in the Krebs cycle, and it has to do with energy production. By the way, you know, statin drugs deplete coenzyme Q10, and there's some information right now before the FDA that they're going to label all statins that the person should take coenzyme Q10. That is why people get muscle pain and muscle depletion, and muscle weakness is because of the depletion, rather, of coenzyme Q10. And this is a very powerful antioxidant as well, and an energy producer in the brain. So many people, as they get older, and certainly with cognitive decline, say that they don't have mental energy. And this is one of the reasons why. And that's coenzyme Q10, I think, is a very important supplement. This is one of the studies about phosphatidyl serine. You see it's Lethe PS, which is the phosphatidyl serine derived from soybeans. You see that, this is number one complaint that people have, remembering names, faces, and phone numbers. As they get older, you know, I just can't recall that name. I saw the person, I'm thinking, what's his name, what's his name, what's his name? Doesn't come up for 4 days later. With phosphatidyl serine, it brings it back up to about 4 seconds. It's like a safety net in the mind. It pops the word that you're looking for back up. So this, I think, phosphatidyl serine is useful. There are many other studies. Just want to mention 2 other nutrients that you're going to be hearing a lot about, especially this first one, Huperzine A, which is from China. It's a Chinese cub moss from the river banks. Now, you all know, I'm sure, what a drug like Aricept does, right? Remember that? Aricept is a cholinesterase inhibitor. Cholinesterase is the enzyme that destroys acetylcholine, which is your memory neurotransmitter, primary memory neurotransmitter. So drugs like Aricept basically stop the breakdown of acetylcholine, make more acetylcholine and more memory transmitter substance, so hopefully a person will improve their memory. Well, Huperzine A does the same thing, only better. It seems to have a more potent fit into the receptor. And now studies have been done elsewhere, but now they're underway in the United States, and I think that you're going to find, I don't know if drug companies are going to be able to patent this, but this is going to be really an important piece of information that's going to come out to talk about how Huperzine A is actually going to surpass drugs like Aricept and Exelon in the near future. Vinpocetine is a cerebral metabolic stimulant, a metabolic enhancer. It does have stimulating properties, which is why I don't use it too often, because many people like the feeling of stimulation as opposed to regeneration and prevention. So you know how we'd like to go to Starbucks and get 3 cups of coffee, double espresso. So people tend to rely too much on a nutrient like this, which is from the periwinkle plant, by the way, because it does give a stimulating effect. That's why I don't use too much of it. But if someone has Alzheimer's disease or is suffering from early Alzheimer's disease or mild cognitive impairment or another form of pretty significant cognitive decline, I will definitely use this, and I will consider this because it does have a good effect. You just have to watch out for it because it is artificially stimulating. Now let's just talk a little bit about pharmaceutical therapy. We have drugs Aricept, Exelon, memantine, and Reminol. This is galantamine, which is also a natural occurring product, and memantine is Nemata. And this is the newest drug available, and it does have a fairly good effect. But what I want to talk to you about, first of all, we have to look, and when we say fairly good effect, look what this means. Namenda provides a significantly superior effect in cognition versus placebo, but we're talking about 12 weeks, basically. It has a modest effect in some patients for some time, short period of time, 12 weeks compared to placebo. And then they also have a higher functional ability. But look, it's not for very long. I'm talking about a very short period of time, and the Aricept drugs and all that are very similar, I mean in general. Sometimes they can have effect for a couple of years, but and some people think they slow the progression, but this is all controversial. But now I want to show you the power of integration, you see. When you use both Namenda and Aricept, you sustain cognition much longer than before at higher levels. So even with drugs, the concept of integration is very powerful. Now if you add to that something like vitamin E and mental exercise, as we'll see in a moment, and maybe counsel the person about nutrition, you're even going to get a stronger synergistic effect. And here we see a higher functionability as well. But not for that long, but it's a little bit higher. Of course, it's better than nothing. I'm just showing you this to give you the idea of the concept of integration. Even using medication, the power of integration is there. Now we're going to talk about exercise. We're not going to spend too much time on that. In fact, we're probably done with it right now, except to tell you that physical exercise does help prevent development of cognitive decline, men and women. But this was an interesting study that shows women who exercise between age 40 and 60 develop less dementia than those who don't. And we can understand why. It increases blood flow, increases feel-good chemicals and all that. And this is something very fascinating, very important, and except for the concept of stress and stress management, it's probably the least appreciated right now. This is what I call brain aerobics, or simply cognitive exercise or mental exercise. You know, use it or lose it applies to your brain. Like if you go to the gym and lift weights, your muscles get big, you have to use your brain. And so you may say to me, yeah, Dharma, but I'm working 12 hours a day, I'm using my brain. The idea is that's wearing out your brain. The idea is you have to use the other side of your brain. So if you're a left brain person, it would really be good to do something more with the right side of the brain, artistic or music, or go to a nice museum or to the opera, and not just stop there, but to discuss it with your friends. You know, talking about it and going to see it, or doing crossword puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, both of which I don't do. I don't like either one of those. But there are things that you can find that you like for yourself. My thing is music. I like to play music. And we just released a CD called Bliss by my group Bliss. It's called Love Is In You. So that's how I use the other side of my brain, with music. However you can do that is important. We do headline discussion. I had a patient from LA who used to be in the entertainment industry, who's in the music I mean, in the movies and TV. He wrote a lot of very famous shows from his generation. Developed Alzheimer's, but he also had kidney failure, heart disease, and diabetes. He was a sick man. But what we did was we sent someone to work with him 2 or 3 times a week. They did long, deep breathing, get him relaxed, increase the oxygen in the brain, and then they did flashcards with people from his era. You know, you can buy these in Hollywood, all these movie star flashcards. So they show him a flashcard. Who's this? He said, Marilyn Monroe. Okay, great. What movie was she in? Some Like It Hot. Yeah, who else was in that movie? Jack Lemmon. You know, things like that. Get his mind active. And he did pass away about 4 years later, but his Alzheimer's did not get worse. He actually died from an error that was performed on dialysis. He died from a problem that being on dialysis. So, and between the time we started working with him till he died, his Alzheimer's disease really did not progress. Plus, I just like to talk about this a little bit more, as Dr. Schenkel from the University of California, Irvine has said in his research that using your mind could prevent, this is 70%, there's nothing else. I mean, there's no drug that can prevent Alzheimer's disease by 70%. There's no drug there's nothing that can do anything in medicine by 70%. And here that I can think of at the moment, maybe you can, but here you have that using your brain can prevent memory loss by 70% just by keeping your brain active. I always like to tell the story about my mother who lived to be 95. She was pretty healthy right up to the end of her life, and she was very active with her mind. She used to love to watch Jeopardy, you know, the game show. But she didn't just watch it. She was an aggressive TV watcher of Jeopardy. I mean, she would try to yell out those answers and beat the contestants to the punch, you know, and really get the answers and do exceedingly well. Very, very aggressive at it. And one day she called me up. She said, well, I finally figured it out. I said, what'd you figure out? She said, after 10 years of watching Jeopardy, I'm $50 million ahead in paper profits. So the idea is use your brain. And here, there was a recent study done up the road here at the University of Texas in Dallas that showed that Aricept and mental exercise together preserve verbal, mental abilities and quality of life in patients with dementia. So this, again, it's the power of integration, the combination of things, not just one magic bullet approach. Now, I've gone through that part to get to this part because this is really our foundation's work. This is our focus, if you will, this idea about chronic stress in society today, and meditation or stress reduction techniques and the Alzheimer's disease. And I think that this is definitely an emerging hypothesis, and it's something to know about because very few people really know about this. And that's why I want to spend a little bit of time on this. And again, this was a whole section on Newsweek about accelerated aging with chronic stress. And I think that you would agree that if it's not the most stressful time in history, it's definitely accelerating because of probably communication and TV. Turn on TV, we see a bomb going off somewhere. Just to give you an example, when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, it took 3 weeks for people in South Carolina to find out about it. Here, it takes 2 seconds. I mean, you know about it before it happens half the time here when things happen today. So something is happening that is accelerating the stress in our bodies and in our minds and having a deleterious effect on our health. Everybody has, things like email, et cetera, but it brings more work. And everyone's multitasking, doing so many different things at the same time that I think that this definitely has an effect because our brain has not evolved really in the last 10,000 years to handle it. We still have the same brain. So this is something to think about and talk about, and that's why it's important to me. And again, this is not something that I made up. It's not something that, is anything but really legitimate hard science. And I just wanted to show you 2 of the leading books on this, not just articles, but full books on this topic. This is The Neurobiology and Neuroendocrinology of Stress by a number of authors. And this is one of my heroes in the field of neuroscience, if you will. He's a god to neuroscientists, Robert Sapolsky of Stanford University, who wrote this book, Stress, the Aging Brain and the Mechanisms of Neuron Death. Not a very positive title, but nonetheless has tremendous amount of data in it discussing everything that I'm now going to share with you. And this is one of Sapolsky's original papers, talked about stress, glucocorticoids such as cortisol, and aging, and showed that illness and aging are a time of decreased ability to handle stress back in 1992. This is when I first started reviewing the medical literature. And when I discovered this article, I thought, a light went off, and I thought, I think I'm really onto something, so I'm going to pursue this. And that's why I do what I do right now. So basically, this is the first article, and I want to show you a graph from that and show that as we get older, clearly our ability to shut off cortisol, which, as you know, comes from your adrenal glands, goes in the blood, it goes to many places, but in the brain, it essentially attacks the hippocampus, turns it into a toxic dump. It's like battery acid on the memory center of the brain, this cortisol. Not only that, the hippocampus is the feedback loop to the adrenal gland. The cells in the hippocampus send the message back to the adrenal gland, hey, we've had enough, shut it off. But as you see, as your neurons die in the hippocampus from cortisol, there's not enough neurons to send that message back. So you have higher levels of cortisol, which then bathe the hippocampus, and it's in negative feedback, or it's a vicious cycle. And that's why you see when you're 55, it's much harder to shut off cortisol than when you're 45, especially if you have an illness. So take someone who's in the early stages of Alzheimer's, for example. They have a tremendous amount of stress, and a lot of times they can't express it, but it's there inside of them. So that's why it's important that we find some way to reduce stress. First of all, as a prevention, but second of all, in patients with cognitive decline. There's another article by Bruce McCune at Rockefeller University in New York, and Sapolsky at Stanford. You can't find any stronger heavy hitters than this. I mean, this is leading edge here. And again, they talk about stress and cognitive function. And basically, they mention everything that I just said, that chronic stress with the elevation of cortisol causes cognitive decline. This is another one of the people who I really envy, or not envy, but admire, Sonia Lupien, Dr. Lupien from McGill University, along with her mentor, Michael Meany. They did some very interesting studies where they looked at patients, not patients, but subjects, over a period of 4 years, and they found that those whose cortisol levels went up had the highest incidence of cognitive decline. Those that stayed the same on the testing, and if for whatever reason their levels of cortisol went down, they actually had a regenerating or rejuvenating effect. Their brain got younger. They did better on the test. They had no intervention. They were just watching. They did this for about 8 years, and when I talked to Sonia about this, she was actually very upset because she became friends with these people, and they developed Alzheimer's disease just from watching their cortisol levels go up. So again, this is definitely an important topic. And just to show you, as the cortisol level goes up, the hippocampal volume goes down. So cortisol causes a shrinkage of the hippocampus, and that leads to memory loss. I want to show you why this happens, and again, some of the newer drugs like Namenda work in this way to block this receptor, block this glutamate activity here. But you see, glutamate is taken up by the glial cells, the supporting structure of the brain. Cortisol blocks the uptake of glutamate. And then you have an influx of calcium. Basically, the calcium channels don't close. You have an influx of intracellular calcium, and the efflux is blocked. And so what do you think happens when you have too much calcium in your neuron? You get inflammation and free radical damage. So this is why stress produces inflammation and free radical damage, is because cortisol blocks the breakdown of glutamate, which then causes an influx of intracellular calcium. So what are the effects of cortisol over the long term? Not only does it produce inflammation, but it blocks the uptake of glucose, and glucose is the only nutrient used by the brain. So if you don't get glucose into the brain, it's not going to function well, it's not going to have energy, and cortisol blocks the uptake of glucose. It inhibits neurotransmitter function, and it causes first swelling, then atrophy, and finally cell death. So that is why it's so important to find ways to reduce cortisol. So we're going to just switch the channel a little bit and talk about how can we bring balance back into the system. How can we bring balance back into this overactive brain system with high levels of cortisol and cellular death. I'm going to take you back to 1948 to work by a doctor who won the Nobel Prize back then. And what he showed was that he was a Swiss physiologist, and he showed that there's an area in the brain here with he electrically stimulated produced a stress response. In other words, this was in a cat, not in a human. But the tail went up, the eyes dilated, the animal basically went into the stress response. But then he showed something very interesting. Just by moving the probe over a little bit in the hypothalamus, he produced the exact opposite response for this. And he won the Nobel Prize in physiology. He produced the exact opposite of the stress response. He called the stress response the ergotrophic response. He called the opposite the trophotrophic response. And it took about 25 years for this to get named into a more user-friendly name by Dr. Herbert Benson at Harvard, who then named it the relaxation response as the opposite of the stress response. And Dr. Benson did a lot of tremendous work in the last 35 years in this field. So basically, to go into what I call the fourth state, we have the awake state, the sleep state, the dream state. These are normal states. To go into the fourth state, which is the relaxation state, there are a lot of different ways to do this. This is the basic relaxation response: transcendental meditation, Zen, breathwork, yoga, autogenic training, progressive muscle relaxation, hypnosis, music therapy, massage, and prayer are all what I consider basic ways. Now, basic doesn't mean bad. Basic means simple ways, introductory ways to get into the relaxation response, which has proven to have many, many health benefits, tremendous amount of health benefits, and it's primarily related to the reduction in arousal, reduction in stress. You see, with the relaxation response, the oxygen consumption goes way down, even more than when it's compared to sleep. It stays down for about 6-7 hours, which is why they say you should do a meditation or relaxation twice a day. So because it goes down, it stays down, then it starts coming back up. So that's why the recommendation is once in the morning, once in the evening. Now, what happens when you enter into the relaxation response? You reduce your pulse, your blood pressure, your respiration, and your consumption of oxygen. And every illness has been studied, and you see there's a decreased incidence of disease in people who meditate, as well as an improved outcome of medical conditions when meditation or relaxation or any of these basic techniques are included into the care of the person. Decreased pain, improved outcomes with cholesterol, things like that. I'm going to be showing you some classic studies. Just, I could talk about this for days, so I'm just going to show you some classic studies done by Dr. This actually was one of the original studies done by Dr. Benson, where it was shown that patients with high blood pressure taught the relaxation response, lowered their blood pressure, and in many cases were able to decrease their amount of medication and actually come off high blood pressure medication. This is a study with transcendental meditation, one of the first studies back in 1997, that wasn't that long ago, about 7 years ago, that showed that cortisol, this is one of the best studies that showed the reduction in cortisol levels with meditation. Just trying to paint a picture here. Again, transcendental meditation was compared to mindfulness and longevity in nursing home patients, and they found that those who participated in a meditative program had a much higher rate of survival after 3 years. So meditation is a true anti-aging therapy. If there is such a thing as anti-aging, well then meditation is one of the best anti-aging therapies. And I know that you've had Dr. Andrew Newberg here. I don't know if he's been in this exact room, but he's talked here at UT, and he did scanning with monks, Buddhist monks, as well as nuns who did rosary bead meditation, and showed with these scans that meditation not only has all these excellent physical effects, but also on the mind it has a very powerful effect in giving a person a feeling of transcendence or spirituality within themselves by a decrease in activity here in the parietal lobe. You see before and after, a decrease in activity. I don't think you can see it very well on this, but he also showed an increase in areas of the brain responsible for focus, attention, and concentration, which I just want you to remember because I'm going to show you some more information about that. So meditation has a number, and prayer and all those good things that I mentioned have a number of positive effects on our mental health, our emotional health, and our spiritual health. This is a study done by Sarah Lazar. This has no relation here to either of the Bushes. And Herbert Benson, of course, and a colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Gurcharn Khalsa from Boston. They did this study at Mass General Hospital with meditation. And I want to show you this because of the interesting thing is they saw a direct increase in activity in the hippocampus. And we saw that the hippocampus is the area that degenerates with stress and cortisol. So this is a very positive finding. They didn't study anything like cognition or memory or anything like that. They just did a basic scanning study. But this would be an area that is really ripe for further research. Meditation, and I'm going to show you some other studies that we've done, but meditation and, like the Aricept studies where you combine one thing with another. Let's look at Aricept and meditation, for example, or just do scanning studies on patients with early memory loss, teach them more advanced, as you'll see in a moment, advanced meditation techniques, and see the changes in the brain. I'm going to show you some work that we've done. Before I do that, I just want to tell you the difference, because we're going to go in now and talk a little bit more about advanced meditation. This is basic meditation. You have to be comfortable. You don't have to sit like a pretzel. Just have to be comfortable in a quiet environment. You use a tool, and this tool can be anything, any thought, sound, short prayer, or phrase that you want to use to go into the relaxed state. Anything at all. Just should be something positive. So alimony is probably not a good word to focus on. Just should be something positive. One, peace, love, happiness, your breath, in and out. Anything you want. And the key is in the attitude that you take to this, and that attitude is basically you start all over. Because has anyone tried to meditate here before? Okay, well, 3 people out of 25 or 30. You haven't? No? Where are you from? Yeah, you should do it. It's in your blood. It's in your blood. But your father probably did, or your grandfather, right? Oh, okay. So we see that the attitude is very important, because anyone who's tried to meditate can tell you that when you want to slow down your mind, what happens? It's like a 4-year-old child. You say, sit down, relax. Don't move. That's why I brought a 4-year-old in here, and I said, okay, Johnny, I want you to sit here next to Tony. While I'm giving this talk, just stay there and be quiet. Where would Johnny be? He'd be up there talking to them. What's this thing around your neck? He'd be doing that. And your mind is the same way. As soon as you try to quiet your mind and slow down, it's 1,000 thoughts at the wink of an eye. They say, I wish I would have gone to the bathroom before I did this. This is ridiculous. I have to balance my checkbook. And where's Dave? He was supposed to be here. Now why didn't he come here today? All these thoughts go through your mind, right? So what you do at that time is you go back and just start all over again. You say, oh well, 1, or whatever word you're using. That's the whole secret of meditation right there in a nutshell. You just start all over again. Now, we carried these 4 over to advanced meditation, and we add certain specific breath work or a position or a sound called a mantra. And you've heard the word mantra, right? Mantra. Man means human being. Tra is a tool. So mantra is just a tool for the human being to get into a certain effect. That's all it is. It's like if you want to put a nail in the wall, you use a hammer. You want to get a special effect, you use a certain sound. It definitely has an effect on the brain. We use fingertips, touching, and a focus of concentration, just like the attitude. I don't want to spend much time on this. I don't have the time. Again, I'd love to come back and do more sometime. But let's just talk for a second about fingertips, because you remember in anatomy we had something called the homunculus, or the map of the brain. And even though the fingertips are a small part of the body, they make up a large part of the map of the brain, because they're very sensitive. For example, I couldn't pick up this pen with my chest. It just can't do it. But I can reach over and pick it up easily, you see. Fingertips are very sensitive. So some more advanced meditation work has you say a sound while you touch your fingertips. And the reason sounds are so good is there's apparently 84 meridian points, like acupuncture, at the roof of the mouth. Acupuncture, you have points all over your body. There's 84 of them in the mouth. So when you say a certain sound, you stimulate those points, and then that has an effect on the brain. It sends a signal to your brain. And you can see for yourself, if you say a different sound, let's say you're using a mantra, Sat Nam. Sat Nam. You hear that? Now you're using a different mantra. Sa, Ta, Na, Ma. You're stimulating your whole part of your mouth. Sa in the back, Ta, the ridge, Na, the behind the teeth, Ma, the lips. And the lips are also very highly represented in the brain, as is your vocalization apparatus. So this is one of the reasons, from a Western standpoint, that some of these more advanced meditation techniques are so beneficial and so useful and work so well. Now, I've given you that background because I want to tell you about one of our recent research studies that is now in the process of being reviewed for medical journal. And this is advanced meditation, high-resolution brain SPECT imaging in normal volunteers. These weren't people with memory loss. This was done in conjunction with our foundation as well as Daniel Amen's clinic, which is associated with the University of California, Irvine. Nisha Money, at the time, was a resident in neurology at UC San Diego, and Chris Hanks is a genius, a statistician who works for Dr. Amen at the Amen Clinic. So this is a study that we did, and I just want to go over this briefly. Again, we use this meditation called the 5 primal sounds, or the Sa, Ta, Na, Ma meditation, or also called Kirtan Kriya. Kirtan just means singing, and Kriya is an exercise, so it's a singing exercise. And the person would visualize or focus on the sound coming in through the top of the head as they would chant Sa, Ta, Na, Ma, touch their fingers. Do it 2 minutes out loud. Sa, Ta, Na, Ma. 2 minutes in a whisper. Sa, Ta, Na, Ma. 3 minutes totally silently. 2 minutes in a whisper. Sa, Ta, Na, Ma. And then you come back last 2 minutes out loud. Sa, Ta, Na, Ma. So that's what we did without prejudice. We wanted to see what happened. This is the before. This is supposedly a healthy person. But you can see, if you know anything about scanning, this isn't supposed to be there. These are holes in the brain, lack of uptake, lack of activation of the brain. This is the frontal lobe. You see this is all ragged back here, the occipital lobe. They're supposed to be smooth. And same thing with the frontal lobes. These are supposed to be smooth. Okay, that's before. After 11 minutes of doing the meditation, I think you can see that there's a good change here. These holes are filled in. This isn't exactly as how we would like it, but it's an improvement. Same thing back here, an improvement. And what could this thing be? I've been told everything from the brainstem to the thalamus. I'm not really 100% sure. No one really seems to know what this is, but I think one thing we can agree on is that this person here would tend to be, let's say, depressed, flat affect, very flat in the amygdala area and in the emotional centers of the brain. And here there's much more aliveness in the whole brain. And he reported subjectively that he was much happier, his mood improved and that. And when we analyze the data, we see that the parts of the brain responsible for happiness, for example, are activated. And frontal lobe is activated for attention, concentration, and focus. But the thing that I think is most dramatic about this research is that the posterior cingulate gyrus was activated. And the posterior cingulate gyrus is the first part of the brain that degenerates with Alzheimer's disease. The posterior cingulate gyrus is the first area that goes down in activity when patients develop Alzheimer's disease. And look, 11 minutes stimulated the posterior cingulate gyrus. So if I wanted to really run ahead, and I would say, wouldn't it be amazing if only 11 minutes a day we could prevent Alzheimer's disease just doing a simple exercise that builds up the posterior cingulate gyrus that would never degenerate and no one would ever get Alzheimer's. I know that's a stretch, but just think about it. It's possible. I mean, it's certainly possible. No one's ruled it out, and it makes sense. And it makes as much sense as spending $1 billion to find a magic bullet drug that's going to increase acetylcholine. So this is where we are with our research. I think it's fascinating, and we'd like to continue doing this. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue scanning studies, possibly again with Dr. Amen. Like to work with Dr. Newberg up in Penn. Love to talk to Dr. Serapina about doing something and see what we can do to continue with this work, because I think it's very important for the future. The future. Well, I just told you everything I was going to say about the future. That I think that more research obviously needs to be done. Gary Small at UCLA has done a very preliminary study with patients who complained about their brain but didn't have Alzheimer's disease. They said their brain wasn't working too well. Had about 10 or 11 patients, maybe up to 20, and put them on an integrative program, a mini integrative program, not as good as this program, but a mini one, and showed improvements. I think he did scanning too, and showed improvements in their brain scans and in their objective memory testing. So there has been a pilot project done. We could certainly do this with patients with dementia, or I wouldn't do it with patients with the moderate Alzheimer's. I think it's too much then, it's too far gone, but something with mild cognitive impairment, early Alzheimer's disease, I think it would be great to test the whole thing, like Dean Ornish has tested his program for heart disease. I don't know if you're familiar with that. but he showed regression of arteriosclerotic plaque using a holistic approach. So that's what I think the future is going to hold, and excited about it. So let's review a little bit. We talked about diet and memory-specific nutrients, stress management, exercise, both physical, all three, physical, mental, mind, body, and we did mention medication or drugs. And I'd like to call your attention to the beloved poet and writer, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who once said, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us." So we're here as spiritual beings having a human experience, not human beings searching for spirit. And ideally, the end result of a program like this for anyone would be to contact that inner person, that spiritual person inside themselves, and as they age, develop wisdom and happiness so we could give back to society and make this world a better place, because I think that's the ultimate goal of everything that we're doing. So, Tony, thank you. Thank you all very much. And it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for some questions and comments of Dr. Chalsa, and I'm going to put the other group up on there. Now it's okay to take the mutes off for the other locations.
Any questions?
Here's one back here.
Oh, yes.
Any specific about this particular sounds, or it could be any sounds in certain, and if yes, why they are special?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if it could be any sound because that's the only one that's been studied. This was a very powerful meditation given by a yoga master to me. I don't know if you came in late, you didn't see, I talked a little bit about my teacher. And so I think each sound, if I would love to do this if we had unlimited time and money, study every sound and see, I bet you that every sound, whether it's Sata, Nama, Sat Nam, Waheguru, whatever it would be, Om, all these sounds would have different effects on the brain. I think this was the one, I chose this one because it's the one I have the most experience with in using it with brain patients. And it's, Yogi Bhajan once said that all meditation begins and ends with this meditation. This has a wide variety of effects. So I use that one. I would love to do others. You saw probably the one that impacted the hippocampus by the Sarah Lazar group from Harvard, and they used a different mantra. They used Sat Nam on the inhale, Waheguru on the exhale, another advanced mantra.
Does mean they don't have particular meaning? Sound,
well, the sound,
yeah,
I don't, that's a good question also. I don't know if the actual meaning of the sound is what gives the effect. I think it's more of the vibration, what it does to the brain. But Sata Nama is a extended version of Sat Nam, which means my true self, my best self. Sat Nam Waheguru means my true self takes me from darkness to light. I mean, Om is the creation. Om is the active form of the creation. All these sounds, Ram is God. All these Hara, Hara, Hara. All these different mantras have different meanings and things, but I don't know if it's the meaning that has the effect on the brain or what. I don't know. I mean, I know that the meaning probably has an archetypical effect on the psyche, the subconscious, but whether it causes the effect on the brain scan, I don't know. But want to study that? We should study that. That'd be a great thing to study.
If one were to do that in a nursing home, you would have to do it individually.
Yeah, you could do it in, what do you mean?
With one person at a time. I mean, it's meditation.
We did we studied it one person at a time, but group meditation is very powerful. I mean, not talking about the study, but if you could get people in a group, Vic is very familiar with Tai Chi, and there have been studies in elderly patients as well as patients with dementia using the Tai Chi movements, and they're much more relaxed, and they are improved, and not that they don't have decrease in their Alzheimer's, but they are better able to manage themselves. There was a recent paper or a study, it was in the Wall Street Journal, about drumming, drumming and Alzheimer's disease. So the thing is, and massage is fantastic. Massage was originally studied in neonates who were born. And when they were born, they were in a prenatal unit, they were very sick. They're sick neonates, and they used massage and found that their cortisol levels went down. So many things we could do that we're not doing right now, especially in the area of relaxation.
I use a meditation mantra, Maranatha. I've been doing that for about 7 years.
And say that again?
It's an Aramaic word, Maranatha.
Ma?
Lord, come again.
Huh?
Lord, come.
Okay, let's see each sound. Ma,
Ma, ra,
ra,
na,
na. Well, you have almost all the primal
almost
sounds there. There's
fascinating.
another meditation, ra, ma, da, sa,
I've heard that.
which is a totally healing meditation. It said that if a person, we're getting off the topic, but it said that if a person would do Rama Dasa meditation, they could actually learn to send healing energy to someone else. I mean, that's a different subject, just in healing. There's a lot to these sounds, yeah.
Your research, what do you think is the effect of the involvement in community support as far as prevention of Alzheimer?
Well, I don't know about prevention, but the idea of community and community support is huge in general health and in neuroendocrinology. The helpers high. It's people who volunteer their time, which is not exactly community support, but it's related to it. People who have a congregation and are active in that congregation or a support group. I mean, there's been studies even that suggest, although it's controversial, that someone who has group therapy can live longer with breast cancer. That's controversial, but what's not controversial is they have higher quality of life. So this idea of, in India they call it sangat, or congregation, or being around people of like mind, even coming together like this, and then discussing it afterwards is very helpful. I think if you go in a group, an organization together, and have a certain agenda, then discuss it, that's going to be very good for your brain. And as we saw, that type of thing, when you use your mind, can prevent Alzheimer's. Anything? Anybody else?
Anybody at the remote sites have any questions or comments for Dr. Chalsa? Now's your chance. I hear lots of talk. There's discussion going on. Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.